On the bridge of the Darvok, Commander Jagron pointed to the elaborate view screen and looked accusingly at Captain Picard.
The Enterprise is not there.
Picard had personally given his crew orders to wait for their return. What had happened? LaForge stepped to his captain's side.
Maybe it's the infection. You said the Neptune also did unpredictable things.
The captain frowned thoughtfully.
Yes. Or perhaps they were called away by Starfleet.
LaForge nodded.
All right, they're gone. Can't we go back to Mirmadon and try to search for more survivors?
Picard shook his head.
Before we do anything, we have to broadcast a subspace message explaining your theory that the Genesis wave can be bent or narrowed by force fields. Do you have those notes I asked you to compile?
Yes, sir. LaForge took an isolinear chip out of his pocket.
I think we could use tractor beams on a massive scale to form a kind of convexo-convex lens.
Picard looked expectantly at Commander Jagron, who scowled and led the engineer to a communications console. When the transmission was almost complete, Picard turned to Jagron.
2 more things. Let Starfleet know that Admiral Nechayev is alive, and put out an alert that anyone who sees the Enterprise should contact the Darvok immediately.
Deanna Troi crawled through the Jeffries tube under the bridge, fighting the pain and nausea that overwhelmed her because Riker's imposter was pumping out telepathic energy like a generator. With a quick yet careful shot with her phaser, she began to saw her way through the deck itself. As the section of the deck fell through, she ducked back. Her phaser reset to full stun, she popped up through the hole. She fired at Riker, who was looking over the shoulder of the science officer. When Riker realized that his crew was staring at him dumbfounded, he began to draw his own phaser. Troi reset her phaser.
Stop! Please don't make me kill you.
The imposter continued to raise his weapon. Troi watched the form of the man she loves disintegrate under her fire. Scattered everywhere were sprigs of gray vegetation, like mistletoe. The bridge crew gaped at the bizarre remains of their commander. She crossed to the ops station.
Computer, turn off red alert.
She turned to the bridge crew.
I'm sorry I had to do that, but that was not Commander Riker. The real Riker is in sickbay now. The ship is infected by something. Let's get all systems back to normal.
Pacing the bridge, Troi stopped at the con and addressed the crew.
Do any of you know why we're headed to Lomar?
Still stunned, the young officers looked at one another and shook their heads.
Tactical, bring up everything we know about our last destination, Lomar, and send out a distress signal.
While the crew numbly obeyed orders, Troy's gaze traveled to the view screen and its panorama of star clusters and distant nebulas. Somewhere out there was a vile enemy, dangerous beyond belief. In the medical center aboard the Romulan warbird, Captain Picard and Geordi LaForge strode up to Admiral Nechayev's bed. Picard smiled.
Admiral, it's good to see you.
Nechayev squirmed in her bed.
Captain Picard, why am I cooped up here? I feel perfectly fine.
The captain sighed.
Admiral, you nearly died on Mirmadon.
Then Picard and LaForge told her what happened to Dr. Crusher and the Neptune's crew, how the interphase generators worked on Mirmadon as planned, about the fungus and the moss creatures, and how Data, who was unaffected, had a Romulan shuttlecraft and would stay on Mirmadon to help the survivors. They also told her about the disappearance of the Enterprise. Then LaForge shared his theory about stopping the Genesis wave. Nechayev made her decision and told Picard her plan. As Picard left the medical center, he contacted Romulan Commander Jagron.
Captain Picard to Commander Jagron. Jagron here. How is the Admiral? She is well, and she'd like a shuttlecraft to get back to the front and put LaForge's plan into effect. She'll have to leave immediately, Captain, because we have a new destination, the Enterprise. We've received her distress signal, and we're the closest ones to her. We shall depart as soon as the Admiral is off the ship. Jagron out.
The smiling face of Beverly Crusher greeted Captain Picard as he and Geordi LaForge stepped off the transporter platform onto the deck of the Enterprise. She lifted a hypo spray and inoculated them against the fungus. Picard nodded with appreciation.
Good work, Doctor, on the vaccine.
You'll be okay with the fungus, Captain, but you are still susceptible to their telepathic abilities. It was Troi who finally got rid of the Moss creature who somehow infiltrated our ship and infected it, as it had already infected the Neptune. We're lucky in that Troi got an allergic reaction to it. Picard was puzzled.
Doctor, why is it some people get violently ill, while others can resist for days or never become sick?
The creatures are cryptogamic parasites, Captain. They don't want to kill you, not right away. They prefer to keep you alive to do their bidding. When they're done with you, they can give you a fatal dose of fungus that will kill you within hours. Picard nodded grimly as he stepped into the corridor and headed for the bridge. When he arrived, he found a scorched hole in the deck. Counselor Troi lowered her head, looking chagrined. I'm sorry, Captain. The repair crew is replicating what they need to fix it. I just couldn't face that creature head-on. I had to use the Jeffries tube and ambush it.
Quick thinking, Commander. Where was the intruder taking the ship?
To a planet called Lomar, sir. It's old and mostly barren, but it bears a resemblance to the worlds created by the Genesis wave. The captain strode behind the op station.
Ensign, find out how close the boneyard is to a planet named Lomar.
Sir, they're real close. About 2 light years away from each other. Picard nodded, making a decision.
Tactical. Alert Starfleet and the Darvok that we are headed to the boneyard. Following that, we'll be going to a planet named Lomar.
From the tactical station, a young Deltan announced.
Captain, the Darvok is replying. They request permission to accompany us. Tell them we don't expect to come back until the enemy has been defeated, and send them the coordinates for the boneyard.
Picard paced the deck, carefully avoiding the gaping hole.
Khan, set a course for the boneyard. Maximum warp.
Carol Marcus shook herself awake and stretched. For the first time in days, her body wasn't consumed by racking coughs and pain, and her mind was clear. Don't be fooled, she told herself. David and Jim are truly dead. Those creatures out there are not my loved ones. Marcus then heard a disembodied voice, which sounded vaguely like Jim Kirk. You feel better? Yes, Jim. I feel much better. How does the project go? The fake Kirk hesitated before he responded. Not so well. There have been some complications with the initial wave. We'd like to do another discharge. Whatever you say, Jim. I'm always ready to go to my lab. There's just one thing, Carol. You will see us, but we still can't come into close contact with you. It's not safe. Suddenly, her bedroom door creaked open a few centimeters. She walked briskly out the door, anxious to see what was out there with sober eyes. The first thing she noticed was the darkness and the outdoor breeze, damp and sulfurous smelling. She turned to see the fake Kirk standing about 20 meters away. Carol rubbed the string around her finger, and she remembered. Dead. The Kirk in front of her grew a bit indistinct to her eyes. She instantly turned her mind to neutral thoughts. Is David on the station? Yes, my beloved. She smiled wistfully at the fake Kirk. What went wrong with the project? On some of the targets, there was interference, a kind of phase shifting. We need your help to make the carrier wave immune to it. We thought we would try again in a different trajectory. Marcus feigned concern. I'd like to see your scans, the raw data. Patience, my darling. We have time to fix it. Data stood in a dismal forest, surrounded by towering trees. Very deliberately, he took a stride forward. At once, clouds of moss came fluttering out of the treetops. He recorded his observation on his tricorder. Interesting. Apparently, they are alerted to the presence of prey by vibrations and by sound. I have observed the moss creatures feeding upon mobile amphibians. These would seem to be their preferred host species. Suddenly, his tricorder alerted him, and he checked the readouts. To his surprise, tens of thousands of humanoids were moving in his direction. At last, he saw a wall of blue-skinned figures tromping through the woods. He didn't see the moss draped all over their backs, growing into their ears, noses, and mouths until they were on top of him. They beat and ripped at the android with bare hands, knives, or whatever tools they had. With disappointment, Data recognized a female with the auburn hair and thick muscles of Dolores Linton. Opening her mouth wide, showing fungus growing over her teeth and gums, she lunged viciously at the android's face. With a superhuman effort, Data wrenched an arm free from the clutching Bolians and drew his phaser pistol, which he had modified. The weapon emitted a stun field instead of a single beam, and the attackers closest to him collapsed to the ground, unconscious, including Dolores Linton. With Dolores Linton in his arms, the android bounded upward and sailed in a mighty arc over the advancing horde. As soon as he was able to find a clearing, he laid Dolores on the ground and began ripping the moss from her ears, nose, and other orifices. He didn't think the geologist would want to die with a plant growing all over her body. Data sent a signal to his waiting Romulan shuttlecraft orbiting the planet. The two of them immediately disappeared in the blazing swirl of a transporter beam. Mott sat perched on the top of the sanctuary. The tiled dome was still a slippery slope, although enough vines were creeping upward from the ground that he could probably catch hold if he slipped. Using the sanctuaries as shelters had been a good idea, Mott decided. But inside the sanctuary, there were constant complaints against Starfleet. The survivors felt the Federation had done what they said they would do, which was save lives, but with no thought as to what would happen afterwards. Although most of them had lived, their planet had died a grisly death, to be replaced with a cold, smelly mire full of horror. No one had visited them, except for Data. When a clump of moss floated down from the trees, Mott lifted his phaser and blasted it into gray confetti. Only a raging forest fire could get rid of all of it. A forest fire. That was the way the enemy fought, with their dastardly Genesis wave? Why should the survivors show them any mercy? Mott climbed down the ladder to the main attic, which was crowded with surly, frightened people, including his mother. A sea of angry countrymen pressed toward him. What are we going to do? Mott tried to find some words that would mollify them. I have a plan to kill all the monsters and clear the forest. We're going to burn it down.
Yes.
Right.
Burn it down. We'll get them back.
Yeah, get rid of them.
People began running around looking for anything that would burn. The barber's mouth dropped open as he realized that they were going to carry out his vengeful idea right now, without any further discussion. Numerous groups tried to start fires, some succeeding, most failing. Outside, Mott saw two moss creatures stumbling through the underbrush, already on fire. He continued to watch the smoke curl upward through the moss-covered boughs, while flames consumed the underbrush and licked at the tree trunks. Data held Dolores Linton's body against his shoulder, trying to burp her like a baby. She had coughed, gagged, and spit up.
Where am I? And Data, why are you carrying me like a sack of potatoes?
He let her down gently into a seat on the shuttlecraft.
You are coherent. You were covered by one of the moss creatures. They are cryptogamic parasites, and they use a symbiotic fungus as well as telepathy to control the host organism. Data, is Geordi all right? By now, he is aboard the Enterprise, along with Admiral Nechayev.
Data checked his instrument panel.
That is odd. The forest on the surface of the planet is burning in several regions. I am most concerned about the flammable gases extant on the planet, such as methane, hydrogen, and methylformate.
Those swamps may be highly flammable. We should return to the surface. We will have to hope the infected survivors will be able to live until help arrives. After the Hosh docked at the dilithium mining colony of Prous, Leia, Brahms, and Maltz, along with 3 Klingon guards, descended to the bustling underground city. Much to the delight of the Klingons, there were bars, taverns, and restaurants everywhere. People glanced suspiciously at them and gave them a wide berth as they strode through the underground complex. However, a short, chubby human dressed in gaudy plaids that would do a Tellarite proud came up to them. Welcome to Prous. I'm the Chief Administrator, Colin Craycroft. Leia nodded curtly. I'm Captain Leia Brahms of the Hosh. We just got in. Oh, I know that. Word came down that a Klingon ship had docked, and frankly, I couldn't believe it. I take it you're not part of the Klingon fleet? Leia shook her head and gave her false story. No, we're independent traders, here to buy dilithium. She introduced Maltz and the rest of the Klingons. Craycroft lifted an eyebrow. You're a long way from home. Yes, we were on the planet Hakon and barely escaped when it was destroyed by the Genesis wave. Craycroft shook his head. Yes. Terrible tragedy, that. So many planets gone. I hear Earth is next. We're lucky it passed us by. He glanced at the quartet of strapping Klingons. I don't suppose any of you would like to work as miners for a few weeks? The pay is excellent. Maltz growled at him. Work in a hole in the ground? That is not the life for a warrior. Maltz then looked around. Do we have to stand out here and talk? Wouldn't one of those taverns be more comfortable? The administrator smiled. Of course. Let me introduce you to my favorite place, the Pink Slipper. The Klingons surged ahead, leaving Leia, Brahms, and Colin Craycroft to bring up the rear. Leia decided it was time to find out some information and turned to Craycroft. Have you ever heard of a planet called Lomar? I believe I've heard of it, but I can't recall any details. Craycroft looked curious. Why? Are there precious metals there? Leia shook her head, thinking this was pointless. By the time she got to the bar, Maltz had already drained his first mug and was calling for a second. Suddenly, one of the Klingons named Greydock began bellowing in the bar. Hey, people! Does anybody here know anything about Lomar? After a few moments of an uncomfortable silence, the conversation began again. From the shadows crept a bent old man, a Tiberonian, judging from his giant elephantine ears. He shuffled up to Greydock. Do you want to know about Lomar? Leia inserted herself into the conversation. Yes, we do. What's your name? Crustle. Have you been there? The old miner nodded. Yeah, only once. That's a bad place. People who go there never come back. Crustle lowered his voice. There are man-eating plants on Lomar. Maltz was genuinely amused. Man-eating plants. Here, let me buy you an ale. The miner tried to escape, but Greydock swiftly grabbed him and held him in place. You do not refuse a Klingon when he wants to show you hospitality. The old Tiberonian had little choice but to nod helplessly. Leia Brahms tried not to roll her eyes. They were getting nowhere but drunk. She felt a tug on her sleeve, and she turned to see the administrator, Colin Craycroft. Captain Brahms, why don't you and I go to a private booth and discuss business? She let Craycroft take her arm and lead her to the back of the tavern. Craycroft nodded to a tall Andorian waiter who drew open the red curtain on a booth and motioned them inside. As she slid into the compartment, Leia was glad that she had 4 hulking Klingons outside, willing to protect her. Craycroft folded his hands and smiled pleasantly at her. How many cubic meters of dilithium do you want? Brahms had her lie carefully prepared. but it suddenly seemed pointless to lie when time was so precious.
We don't need any dilithium. I really came here to find out about Lomar.
The curtain parted and the Andorian waiter appeared with an open bottle of champagne and 2 fluted glasses. Leia took the proffered glass and put it to her lips. Craycroft leaned toward her.
Are you saying that there is something of value on Lomar?
Leia opened her mouth to deny it, but she suddenly felt lightheaded and extremely tired. Her mind tried to form a quick lie, but her mouth betrayed her.
The Genesis wave comes from Lomar.
Leia tried to rise to her feet.
I gotta go.
But the muscles in her legs refused to work. Craycroft snapped his fingers.
Rakber, get in here.
The Andorian waiter stuck his head through the curtain.
Yes, boss? What are the Klingons doing?
Drinking, boss. So far, the drug hasn't had any effect on them.
See if you can pick a fight with them. I'll take her downstairs.
Rakber shook his head doubtfully.
Remind me to ask you for a raise.
Craycroft gripped Leia tightly around the shoulders.
I'm not really the chief administrator, but I'll take you to him if you cooperate.
He reached behind the couch and pressed a panel. At once, the wall behind her slid open and the booth began to rotate. The soft cushions dropped away beneath her and Leia felt herself falling into darkness. Through a hazy fog and blaring music, Maltz thought he heard something troubling. A scream. The old Klingon had been drunk many times in his life, so he knew the feeling well. This wasn't it. With a lunge, he slapped the mug out of Graydok's hand.
Where's the captain?
Graydok snorted.
Oh, she went off with that popinjay.
Maltz saw the Tiberonian Crussel lying at his feet, blessedly passed out. His 2 younger Klingon comrades were semi-conscious. At that moment, a gangly Andorian approached them. I bring word about your captain. She has gone off with Mr. Craycroft. In a flash, Maltz whipped out his knife and shoved the point under the Andorian's chin, drawing a drop of blue blood.
I'll tear off your antenna with my bare hands, so help me, Kalis. Where is our captain?
With a trembling finger, the Andorian pointed to the back of the tavern. Maltz prodded the Andorian's back.
Lead the way. Graydok, wake up those 2 children. Bring the Tiberonian, too.
The big Klingon picked up the remaining mugs of ale and dumped them over the heads of the 2 younger Klingons. Then he grabbed the old Tiberonian and tossed him over his shoulder like a sack of targ food. With the terrified Andorian in the lead, the wary party of Klingons stalked to the back of the tavern. The Andorian pointed to the only booth that was empty.
There's a secret panel behind the cushions.
Suddenly, there was a stampede of footsteps coming from the front of the tavern.
Security! Security, nobody move!
The Andorian screeched for help.
Help me! Help me!
With a quick thrust of his knife, Maltz made sure it was the last sound he ever made. Maltz motioned to his comrades.
Hurry! In the booth! Grab the Tiberonian. Lay down cover fire.
They ducked into the booth and closed the curtain behind them. Maltz was busy ripping cushions away from the walls. Finally, he uncovered the panel and pressed it without a moment's hesitation. At once, the plush booth turned into a carnival ride, swirling around and dumping all of them, 4 Klingons, a sleeping Tiberonian, and a dead Andorian, down a long chute into the darkness. Maltz and his comrades landed in a sea of soft cushions. Lewd paintings of debauchery covered the dark stone walls. There were 2 doorways, but no sign of Captain Brahms or Colin Craycroft. Graydok hid the body of the Andorian in the cushions, while Maltz went to a view screen and activated it. The view on the screen showed the empty tavern above. The old Klingon continued to bang on the controls of the view screen, cycling through various other sights until he found a plush bedroom with a woman lying prone on the bed. It looked like Leia Brahms. Maltz drew his disruptor and motioned to his younger comrades.
You 2 take the left-hand passage and look for this room where they hold the captain. Graydok and I will do likewise. Do not allow yourselves to be captured.
The 2 young Klingons nodded in acknowledgement and hurried down the assigned passageway. Maltz motioned to the old Tiberonian, who was snoring peacefully, and Greydock heaved a sigh and picked him up. With a worried frown, Maltz leveled his disruptor and led the way down the right-hand corridor. Within a few paces, the corridor expanded into a much larger chamber, a dilithium mine. Workers in lightweight environmental suits and hoods manned tools like grinders, air hammers, and saws. Harried miners had to physically chop and grind the rubble in order to find crystals large enough to be saved. Maltz backed into the shadows of the tunnel and motioned Greydock to go back the way he had come. Greydock dumped the Tiberonian miner onto the ground, reached into his belt, and removed a small capsule which he broke under the old miner's nose. At once, the Tiberonian gasped and waved his arms feebly.
Where are we? Near a dilithium mine. They drugged us, kidnapped our captain, and tried to arrest us.
The Tiberonian trembled.
Do you know? You'll be sentenced to the mines.
Crussell motioned toward the noise coming from the mine.
Listen to them. A lot of them are prisoners leased out to the mines. That's where you're going to go.
Maltz grunted in anger.
First, we must find the captain. Back to the pillow room.
They hadn't walked far when the Tiberonian froze. Maltz scouted ahead. Finally, he heard security voices. It sounded as if they had found the Andorian waiter's body. He turned around and went back to Greydock and the Tiberonian. He pointed back down the hallway toward the distant sounds of mining.
What about those environmental suits the miners wear? They will disguise us.
Crussell craned his neck to look around a corner.
We can get them from the clothing bins or the locker room. They should be nearby.
Maltz leveled a jaundiced eye at the old miner.
Are you going to help us get out of here, or are you going to betray us? I'm in as much trouble as you are. We need a diversion.
Suddenly, they heard voices behind them. Maltz reached into his sash and pulled out a tiny chunk of pliable explosive, which he affixed to one of the flickering artificial candles.
Go ahead of me. Find suits and disguise yourselves. Then look for me. Move!
Greydock pushed the old Tiberonian down the corridor while Maltz backed away from the charge he had rigged. The moment the guards appeared, he shot the light with a narrow beam. The explosion ricocheted along the power lines into the main chamber. Several light standards exploded, causing even more panic. A third of the mine was plunged into darkness.
Cave in! Cave in!
Maltz didn't waste time getting a disguise. He jumped a miner and clubbed him with his disruptor. Soon, he looked like all the other panicked miners, except that he carried a Klingon disruptor in his hand. He watched for two miners who were not running as fast as the others. He noticed them lurking in the doorway of a small closet. Soon, all three started in the direction of the mad rush. The two Klingons had to practically carry the old Tiberonian. He was trembling so badly. One of the mine bosses, thinking the Tiberonian was wounded, shouted at Maltz.
You there! If he's injured, get to the emergency transporter.
The trio scurried in the indicated direction. They got into a line with other miners waiting to enter a large tube. While they waited, Maltz tried to ignore the alarmed shouts all around them. He hid his disruptor from view and turned to Greydock.
Limp. Pretend to be injured.
Finally, they reached the tube, where the operator waved all three of them aboard. With relief, the trio stepped up on the transporter platform. In another part of the underground complex, Leia Brahms, still groggy, was hauled rudely to her feet. As she opened her eyes, Craycroft shook her.
Wake up! We have to get out of here! The tunnel alarm has been set off!
Leia dove back onto the soft bed. Craycroft shouted,
Oh, to hell with you! What do I care if you get arrested? I'll beat you to Lomar!
Suddenly, Leia was left alone. Slowly, she accepted the notion that she should be awake and coherent. She rolled over and tried to find the floor with her feet. There were lewd paintings on the walls, and the room was decorated with mountains of lacy pillows and billowing curtains. The bed lay between two doors at opposite ends of the room. Both were ajar. Flashes of light slashed into the metal door, ripping it apart in a hail of sparks. Two figures collapsed against the metal debris and tumbled into the room. To her horror, Leia witnessed the final seconds of life for the two young Klingons who had come with her to Protus. Their bodies disappeared in a sizzling red haze. Leia had no time to do anything but hurriedly pull the covers around her and cower in the bed. Phaser rifles leveled for action, a detail of 4 security guards burst into the bedroom.
Out of the bed! Hands up!
Leia gave a wide-eyed look.
I'm naked. The awful things they did to me. The animals. 2 more Klingons. They went out the other door. If you hurry, you can catch them.
Doubt left the leading guard's eyes.
Squad, continue pursuit.
The guard pointed to Leia.
Lady, you get dressed and wait here for us.
Seconds later, the security detail was gone, and throwing off the covers, Leia rolled out of bed, her head still groggy. She was terribly saddened by the loss of the 2 young Klingons. They had gone down fighting. Their fellows would say they had achieved good deaths. Getting her wobbly feet under her, she plodded out the door into a gloomy passageway. Maltz, Greydock, and the feeble Tiberonian Crussel inched toward a huge underground chamber which was outfitted with at least 50 beds. There was no apparent way to escape from the underground chamber. Despite hanging back as much as possible, soon they would have to take off their hoods to be examined, revealing their identities. With a smile under his disguise, the KG Maltz bent down to the old Tiberonian.
Crussel, take off your hood and shout as loud as you can that the Genesis wave is going to hit Protus.
With difficulty, the Tiberonian pulled the hood over his big head and floppy ears.
Doom! Doom is here! The Genesis wave is headed toward Protus. That's what's causing the tunnels to collapse.
While most of the people in the corridor surrounded the Tiberonian and bombarded him with questions, the 2 Klingons plowed against the current of bodies back to the transporter tube on which they had arrived. They approached the transporter as 2 injured miners limped off. The transporter operator was craning his neck to see over the surging mob.
What's going on down there?
Maltz nodded to Greydock, who stepped behind the operator and brought a heavy fist crushing down on the back of his head. Greydock bent over the controls as he heard the Tiberonian Crussel shout.
There they are! They're the ones who told me about the wave coming!
Maltz whirled around to see that the Tiberonian had spotted them and was pointing in their direction. Maltz leapt into the transporter tube.
Greydock, pick a place and let's go!
Greydock punched the board a couple of times, then he jumped into the transporter. Once the tingling of the transporter beam had stopped, Maltz and Greydock stumbled out of a booth into the middle of a ladies' lingerie shop. A fashion show was in progress. Wide-eyed, Maltz stared at the women.
Everybody, run for your lives! The tunnels are collapsing! The Genesis wave is headed toward Protus.
Maltz and Greydock shoved their way through the audience and exited the clothing shop into the busy subterranean mall. Maltz looked around for signs. Finally, his eyes lit up behind his clear faceplate.
Look, there's a sign for the space docks.
Greydock gaped at him.
You want to return to the ship without our captain? Our men?
The old Klingon glared at his comrade.
Remember this well. The blood oath is more important than any one of us. If the others are worthy, they will find their way back to the ship. But we will do what we can to help them. We will continue to spread panic.
The climb up the slide was slow and laborious, because Leia Brahms had to stop every meter or so to burn more handholds and footholds with her phaser. She could vaguely remember plunging down this slide to reach the plush chamber below. She emerged into the same private booth she had visited before, only now it was torn apart. As she caught her breath, Leia noticed something even more unusual. Silence. Earlier, the pink slipper had been full of raucous noise and behavior. Then she remembered that she had left 4 Klingons behind, and 2 of them were dead. Maybe all 4 of them were dead. It's all my fault, she decided gloomily. I brought them here. All this time I was worried about their conduct, when my conduct was what endangered the crew and the mission. Still distracted, Leia reached the front door of the pink slipper. She saw 3 people run past the tavern in a panic. Leia wondered what was going on. She had to return to her ship and hope she still had a crew. A moment later, she was loping through the mall alongside members of the populace. She asked a Corridan woman where everyone was going. Well, haven't you heard? The tunnels are collapsing, and the Genesis wave is supposed to hit us any minute. Leia pulled out her communicator badge. Brahms, to the bridge of the Hosh. Come in. Are you there? There was no response. It wasn't going to be that easy to get out of here, but she had to keep trying. Studying the signs overhead, Leia saw that most of the panicked people were headed the same way she was, to the space docks. As they neared a monorail station, she was soon bogged down in the crowd. Guards were shouting at them. The monorails are overloaded! Go back! There is no emergency! The crowd pressed forward anyway. Suddenly, a projectile came lofting over their heads. A big plume of red smoke went up, followed by cries of alarm. People nearest the red smoke sat calmly on the floor and looked as if they were in bliss. Leia held her breath and kept low. Dazzle gas. She had heard of it. Another gas canister lofted over the crowd. It was like the guards were inciting the riot, thought Leia. What idiots! Using her elbows and shoulders, she worked her way over to the wall, looking for any place where she could gain a handhold and pause in this mad fight. Her pace quickened when she saw the familiar black and yellow colors of a firefighting box. She lunged for the handle of the box and gripped it. The door opened. She glanced inside the box and saw a lever beside the coiled hose. She had an irrational urge to fight back against the heavy-handed security officers and their dazzle gas. She reached inside the box, grabbed the lever and pulled it down. At once, the recoil from the hose slammed her against the wall, but she gripped the nozzle and managed to maintain control of a powerful jet of fire suppression chemicals. Leia tried to aim the stream at the smoking canisters. One of the guards jumped to his feet right in front of her and grabbed the hose from her hands. A second guard pinned her rudely against the wall.
You, come with us.
To her surprise, the guards who had assaulted her suddenly let her go, and the one with the hose turned it back upon his fellow guards.
It's us, Captain.
Leia whirled around to stare at the snaggle-toothed face under the gas mask and hood. Greydock! First Officer Maltz, too? She looked at the wiry warrior manning the hose, keeping dozens of locals at bay. Maltz shouted to her over the din.
Captain, have you seen our 2 younger comrades?
Yes, Maltz. They're dead. The Klingon roared at her.
How?
I'll tell you about it later. Get us out of here. Using the powerful jet as a battering ram, Maltz surged into the crowd, cutting an impressive path. They fought their way toward the monorail station. The closest monorail car was empty and began to move. Shooting on the run with his disruptor, Greydock drew a crude oval on the side of the car, then he crashed into it at full speed. The Klingon and a chunk of the car fell into the cabin with a crash, and Maltz and Leia dove in after him. Knowing they would soon lose pressure and oxygen as the car made its way to the surface of Prous, they charged to the front of the car. They opened the airlock and went into the next car. At the sight of the crusty old Klingons, there were audible gasps among the 30 or so passengers. Maltz sneered.
We are taking a slight detour. I need a crew. Who wants to sign on?
There were disbelieving looks all around, followed by nervous tittering. Someone asked, "Where are you going?"
To find the fiends who created the Genesis wave and kill them.
It took a while, but finally a human youth stood up. "I'll go." The woman with him, probably his mother, clutched his arm. "Herbert, they'll kill you." Maltz nodded.
Step out here, young human. Only boredom will kill you.
The lad gently pulled away from the woman's clutches. Maltz and Greydock sized him up. He looked like a well-groomed teenager, about 16 years old. Maltz slammed a beefy hand into the lad's scrawny shoulder.
We accept you.
Then Maltz turned to Leia.
Captain, how did our Klingon comrades die? Was it a warrior's death?
Oh, yes, Maltz. There was a fantastic battle in the tunnels. They were trying to protect me, but they were outnumbered. They went down in a blaze of phaser fire. A tear formed in Maltz's roomy eye.
Let's announce them to Stovokor.
As the Klingons threw back their heads and roared to the heavens, the passengers shrunk back. Leia finally decided to join in. She no longer cared who lived and died anymore, as long as the ones responsible for the Genesis wave were on the rolls of the dead. Carol Marcus mused as she gazed around her spacious laboratory. This is quite an impressive hologram. No wonder all of it seems so familiar. They dredged it up from my mind, warts and all. Keep working, she ordered herself. There were ways she could sabotage this new trial, but she knew they could read her mind. She had to be honest with them whenever possible, which meant not attempting to keep a secret. I'll have to do something spur of the moment, she decided. And I'll probably only have one chance. Until then, I'll pretend they're my loved ones while we all go through the motions. The fake Kirk swaggered through the door, wearing the protective cleanroom suit he wore almost all the time now.
Do you like the new suits, Carol?
I don't care what suits you wear, darling. Where are the long-range scans you and David were talking about?
You heard us talking? Your hearing is very good for
an old lady, Jim? She finished his sentence, but she was thinking about something else. That she had picked up their thoughts mentally. Kirk mustered some of the tenderness with which he had enthralled her. With a gloved hand, he touched her cheek.
You are not old. I know you're worried about the target planets, but as I told you, we've taken great pains to avoid inhabited planets. We are doing this quadrant a tremendous service, terraforming useless rocks into a chain of beautiful paradises.
Carol Marcus squeezed his hand in return and turned back to her instruments with a sigh. I'm sure you know what you're doing when you keep data away from me. The fake Kirk held his palms up.
The data is confusing. We just don't want to confuse you. But you'll get the raw data. Let me go to the computer room and fire up the sensor logs.
After the creature left the room, the elder scientist let out a sigh and gripped her console for support. It was draining. They had nearly killed her by accident, but their cure had left her with something of theirs. She had a feeling that she would only be seeing the two ghosts when necessary. The worst of the damage has been done, she told herself, both to me and the galaxy. The only thing left is to stop it from happening again. Watching from orbit in the Romulan shuttlecraft, Dolores Linton saw how in their zeal to fight the Moss creatures, the Bolians had turned Mirmadon into an unholy inferno. She turned to Data, who sat beside her at the controls of the Romulan shuttlecraft. Data, all readings getting worse. The android cocked his head. If current trends follow my predictions, most of the survivors will be dead in 38 hours, when the air becomes unbreathable. However, the Moss creatures will be neutralized. Dolores looked out the viewport at the smoldering planet. Small consolation. Data nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps they are not lost. There may be a fleet of rescue vessels just waiting to come to Mirmadon when they know it is safe to cross the residue of the wave. How will they know that? We will have to pilot this uncloaked shuttlecraft back to unaffected space to assure the Admiralty that a normally equipped fleet of starships can fly safely to Mirmadon. Dolores dreaded the prospect. All right, Data. Set your course. I never expected to live forever anyway. Just make it quick. The geologist stiffened in her seat and screwed her eyes shut. A moment later, the shuttlecraft banked as it pulled out of orbit. she felt nothing unusual.
Data, tell me when it's going to happen.
Finally, Data spoke.
Nothing happened.
Dolores opened her eyes to see nothing but a beautiful sprinkling of stars floating in the darkness. Enough time had passed for the effect to have dissipated, although communications were still unresponsive. The android almost looked pleased.
Our destination is the rendezvous point where we met the Romulans. Going to warp drive.
Soon Data spoke again.
We have arrived, but there are no ships in the vicinity. We will have to use delayed subspace to communicate.
Dolores banged her fist on the console.
Where the hell are they?
Data considered the question before replying.
Unknown. If I were to make a supposition, I would say Earth.
Dolores slumped across the console.
It's hard to imagine Earth being gone. But what about all those people on Mirmadon? I will send a report via subspace, but their fate is out of our hands. We are one small shuttlecraft.
Standing alone in the stellar cartography room aboard the Sovereign, Admiral Alina Nechayev moved a tiny jump stick on a device in her hand to enlarge her view of the coal sack, a black nebula. It was mostly a large chunk of space that was relatively empty. In its mysterious heart floated an even darker body, the furnace, classified as a non-standard quasar. Whatever it was, the furnace obliterated anything that came too close, including most varieties of light waves. For Nechayev, it was the ultimate incinerator, and she was assigning the dirtiest garbage to it. That is, if the LaForge theory worked and their 40,000 starships did their job. The Admiral turned to see her main attaché stride into the domed room. Admiral, I have the latest dispatches. Commander Data has sent word that the forests of Mirmadon are on fire. He requests aid for the survivors within the next 38 hours maximum. He says we can navigate the space around Mirmadon safely now. The effect is over. Nechayev nodded. Adjust the orders for the Klingons so that they'll go to Mirmadon as soon as we release them. Anything else? Yes, Admiral. The Enterprise reports it has almost reached the Boneyard, but sensors don't find any signs of the Genesis wave or its origin. Also, the Romulan Third Fleet reports that they're in position. Nechayev nodded. Good thing. They're only an hour and 5 minutes behind schedule. Dismissed, Lieutenant. The Admiral stared at a blazing ring floating in the middle of the three-dimensional holographic representation of the region. She had dubbed it the Ring of Fire. 40,000 starships assembled from all the powers and fleets in the Alpha Quadrant. But the wave was now 4 million kilometers wide, and it took no prisoners and gave no quarter. The idea of stopping it with a ring of ships and a network of force fields was almost absurd. But it has to bend, she told herself. Everything has to bend eventually, doesn't it? To her surprise, Nechayev actually drifted off to sleep, or at least she was in a drowsy state when she heard the voice of the captain addressing the ship. To all hands, the Genesis wave has been spotted and is still on trajectory with an ETA of 10 minutes. Beginning 10-minute countdown. All stations maximum synchronization. Nechayev gripped the arms of her chair, and she didn't let go until she heard the computer countdown.
10, 9...
Admiral Nechayev rose to her feet and began to pace the stellar cartography room. Against her will, she looked at the ring of fire circling the wave's target.
1.
At that moment, it illuminated brightly. On the simulation, a red beam entered the ring of fire, and the Admiral held her breath again. The image flickered for a moment, probably the real moment when the wave hit the ring. Then the red beam went streaking off at a different angle. It blinked as it headed toward the dark desert in a sea of stars, the coal sack. Before she even sat down, the captain's voice sounded on the ship-wide intercom. Mission achieved. The Genesis wave has been diverted. Earth is saved. At his desk in engineering, Geordi LaForge sat back in his seat, grinning broadly. Dolores Linton's face was on his screen, and the muscular geologist was talking a kilometer a minute.
So, Geordi, there I was, with this stuff growing all over me. Yuck! And Data comes along and saves my life.
Data, who was sitting beside her on the shuttlecraft, interrupted.
Actually, you were trying to bite my face. I'm sorry, Data, but I was having a really bad day. Geordi, Data's a handy fellow to have around.
The android smiled modestly, then turned serious.
Unfortunately, there are millions we could not save. Do you know about the fires on Mirmadon?
Geordi nodded. I haven't had much to do except keep track of dispatches back and forth. I'm sure glad the Genesis wave is gone. Data cocked his head.
But is it over? There is always the possibility our enemy may deploy the wave again.
That's why we need you back here, Data. The captain says we're going to wait at the boneyard until you get back. LaForge out. Geordi's screen reverted to a Starfleet logo, and the chief engineer sat back in his chair, frowning. It was a big relief that Dolores was safe again, because he felt responsible for leaving her on Mirmadon. He wished he could have kept Leia Brahms in sight, too. Captain Picard sat at his desk in his ready room, trying not to let anger creep into his neutral expression. The narrow, scowling visage of Commander Jagron of the Romulan warbird filled his computer screen.
Captain, the one good thing that came from your ship being infiltrated by the enemy is that we have the name of a planet. It may not be their homeworld, but it is a start. So, are we going to Lomar or not?
Picard took a deep breath and replied calmly. All of our indicators say that the source of the Genesis wave is here in the boneyard.
We've had 12 hours to run sensor scans and have turned up nothing. So I propose that we split our forces and I will take my ship to Lomar.
Picard did his best to smile. Good hunting. Captain Picard was troubled and sat back in his chair. Although their enemy was despicable, he wasn't sure if they deserved to have the Romulans turned loose against them without any supervision. Nevertheless, the Enterprise couldn't be in two places at once, and both the Boneyard and Lomar required investigation. Picard to bridge.
Riker here. I see the Romulans are leaving.
Yes, they are on their way to Lomar. We are going to stay here and investigate. When Data returns, have him put together a plan that will make the most of our resources. Picard out. To Leia Brahms, Lomar looked like a planet which had been captured in ancient black and white photography. Every bit of color and life had been drained from its jagged features. The towering peaks and dingy gray poles were offset by the great black bogs which pocked the ashen landscape. No one said anything as the Hosh assumed standard orbit. With a small crew, the loss of the two younger Klingons was devastating, even if they had picked up one young raw recruit, Herbert, a human like Leia. Worse yet, they had lost the two crewmen while gaining no information about Lomar, except that they had man-eating plants. From this distance, it didn't appear as if they had any plants at all. For the first time, Leia sensed coming here would be a huge waste of time, worse than going to Prous. In the records, Lomar had looked like one of the planets created by the Genesis wave. Close up, it seemed to be a dead version of that model, desiccated and all used up. Maltz spoke from the command chair where he had taken to sitting lately.
Maybe this was the enemy's homeworld, a long time ago.
Greyduck, who was now on tactical, turned to Maltz.
There's a shuttlecraft on the surface.
Maltz and Leia hurried to tactical. They peered over Greyduck's shoulder at what was unmistakably a vessel nestled in a relatively level and dry crater. Leia Brahms shook her head in disgust.
It's bound to be Colin Craycroft. He said he was going to beat us here, and he did.
What is he looking for?
He thinks there's treasure here, given our interest in the place.
Maltz rubbed his hands together.
Good. We will kill him and be done with it before we go on. Ready away, team. Greyduck and Herbert, you come with me.
The lad looked startled, as if he hadn't expected such an assignment.
Yes, sir.
Leia stepped forward.
I'll go too.
Maltz lowered his head.
As you wish, Captain. but we won't be talked out of killing him.
Maltz, I'm ordering you not to kill him. If we find him, we have to question him. Maltz narrowed his eyes.
Yes, Captain.
Leia turned to Greyduck. Is there anyone on board the shuttlecraft?
No. No life signs in the area.
Leia looked pointedly at Maltz. For all we know, it's a wreck. Abandoned. But let's inspect it. Karak, you have the bridge. Keep shields up except when transporting. Use caution. As Maltz and Greyduck filed off the bridge onto the turbo lift, Leia fell in beside Herbert. Herbert, we're going to have to wear environmental suits. I've done that before. I can do it. I don't know what to tell you to expect. Just follow orders and you'll be fine. Carol Marcus pretended to be sleeping on her laboratory cot. She had left the newest algorithms for the solar analyzer on her screen without sending it to her captors, and she was fairly certain they would want to see the solutions immediately. It was an impressive piece of work. Unfortunately, Jim and David were closer than ever to discharging the Genesis wave a second time, in a different direction, and she still had no idea how to stop them. She felt them in her mind before she heard the door to the lab open. As she had practiced in so many naps, she tried to become a receptor, putting out nothing, giving them nothing to suspect, taking in everything. They stole into the room, anxious needs filling their thoughts. They weren't cold and impassive as she had thought, but hungry and desperate. It was like the center was missing from their lives. Eagerly, they began poring over her results. The phony Kirk could not contain his excitement.
This will work. We must incorporate it immediately.
The fake David raised an objection.
But the test area is guarded by that ship. We can go no closer. Then we must discharge from here.
They shuffled out of the room as laboriously as they had shuffled in, and Carol Marcus waited until the door closed. It was clear that a ship was stopping them from docking in the ideal position to discharge the second Genesis wave. Perhaps that would buy her some time. She had to break out of this hologram and see the rest of the ship, where they really were.